Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm Don Arleth, coming to you live from Warsaw. You're watching World News. This is absolutely immoral, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, referring to a major gift scheme, a graft scheme, uncovered by Ukraine's anti-corruption investigators. NABU and SAPO reportedly caught a sitting lawmaker, 2 local officials, and an unspecified number of National Guard personally taken bribes.
An exchange of 1,200 of our people who are currently in captivity is being prepared. We must free everyone, all our military personnel, all our civilians, no matter how difficult it may be. Chief of the Presidential Office, Andrei Yermak, also reported on communication with our partners, in particular with the Americans. The United States is ready to help. I want to thank them for that. Pressure on Russia can really work. It can work in such a way that Moscow feels the consequences of prolonging the war.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will likely visit Moscow for talks later this week. While speaking to reporters, Trump also said that he is prepared to impose additional sanctions on Russia if it does not reach a ceasefire with Ukraine by August 8th.
Well, there'll be sanctions, but they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. You know, they're wily characters, and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions, so we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on the border in terms of, we're talking about with Gaza, getting people fed. And he may be going, I think next week, Wednesday or Thursday, may be going to Russia. They would like to see him. They've asked that he meet, so we'll see what happens.
Europe needs to do a lot more to push Russia to the negotiating table, says U.S. national security and foreign policy analyst Mark Toth. During a recent interview on TVP World, Toth explained that if Europe started to seriously disrupt Russia's shadow fleet, as well as send Ukraine Taurus missiles, Putin would be much keener to reach a ceasefire than he is right now.
Europe needs to do a lot more. I think the biggest threat is to Europe in terms of what Putin would do next in the Baltic states, to Poland, et cetera. And I think one of the things that they can do is what Zelenskyy just called for, starting to interdict this fleet, that 70% of the oil that Russia trades through its shadow fleet goes through the Baltic Sea. That's something tangible that Europe can be doing right away to put a stop to that. And that would put a huge negative in terms of cash flow that Putin is getting to fund his war. Would stop these illegal oil sales from happening. Europe can also push forward things like the Taurus missile that I mentioned a few minutes ago. That could take out the Kerch Bridge, which would be a very tactical, useful operation in terms of isolating Crimea and making it difficult for Putin to resupply his troops that today are still striking Kherson in southern Ukraine and creating threats there. Russian forces are going after a key bridge there. Why not enable them through the Taurus missile, et cetera, from Europe to do that elsewhere? So I think the same messaging that I have for the Trump administration to do more militarily in terms of offensive weapon capabilities is the same thing for Europe.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy came out of the recent anti-corruption controversy in Ukraine looking like a democratic leader by responding to the concerns of his citizens who took to the streets in protest. That's according to Taras Kuzio, professor of political science at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Kuzio recently joined TVP World to discuss a major drone procurement scam in Ukraine, which was uncovered by Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies just days after their independence was restored following mass protests, as well as the overall impact on public trust in Zelenskyy's administration.
How does President Zelenskyy come out looking after this series of events?
Well, he comes out looking as a democratic leader in the sense that he listened to the protesters. He listened to
but he was the one that
movies.
instigated
Yes,
taking away
yes.
the powers in the first place. So, as you say, an embarrassing
show me a
U-turn.
politician that's never made a mistake. Show me a politician that's never made a mistake. They're human beings. I would be very critical. I am very critical of Zelenskyy for doing this, but kudos to him that he didn't act like the typical local leader like in Russia and just repressed those protesters. He allowed the protesters to show their anger. That had an impact on him quickly reversing his mistake. He listened to European leaders, Western leaders as well. And so I think he acknowledged that this was a screw up. I mean,
Understood.
there's no question about it.
Russian authorities have reported a Ukrainian drone attack on an oil depot near Sochi, a resort which hosted the 2014 Winter Olympic Games. The strike comes following one of the most lethal weeks in Ukraine in recent months. Kyiv has been targeting Russian oil and gas infrastructure in response to Moscow's attacks on Ukrainian territory since February of 2022. Sochi Mayor Andriy Proshunin shared that there were no victims, claiming the situation is under control. Air traffic was temporarily halted at Sochi Airport, but has since resumed. Airstrikes on the resort, located some 400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, have been relatively rare compared to other Russian cities. Poland has extended its temporary border controls with Germany and Lithuania until October 4th and possibly even longer. The measure was originally introduced for a period of 1 month, but Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński says concerns over illegal migration persist. Meanwhile, Estonia is installing a new security gate at a key pedestrian crossing with Russia to reinforce its eastern frontier amid growing concerns over border security and potential migration pressure.
Temporary checks on Poland's borders with Germany and Lithuania will continue until October 4th. Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński said that the 98% tightness of the country's eastern border is causing Belarusian and Russian security services and illegal migration to shift to other routes.
Today, the fundamental issue, not only for us, but for our partners in the European Union, is to close, if I may use such a word, the route that moved to Lithuania and Latvia. Hence these decisions, the decisions that Prime Minister Donald Tusk made and Minister Tomasz Siemoniak also made about the reintroduction of temporary controls on the German border and on the Lithuanian border.
The interim border checks entered into force on July 7th, initially for 30 days, with Polish authorities citing security considerations as the reason for the move.
We've been struggling with organized illegal migration. And when I say organized, I mean it's been orchestrated, let's call it what it is, by the Lukashenko regime with support from the Putin administration. And the consequences have been very serious.
At the Sunday presser, Polish officials noted that they're in contact regarding the extension of measures with the relevant partners, including the European Commission, also with the purpose of obtaining additional funds.
For the border, first of all, the Polish-Belarusian border, but also 2 other borders between Latvia and Belarus and Lithuania and Belarus. This will require the efforts of the entire EU, because the nature of this migration route is different from routes in other countries. Here, we are dealing with a hybrid threat, the instrumentalization of migration and operations by countries that are hostile to EU member states.
In line with the requirements set forth by the Schengen Code, Poland also notified the European Commission of the extension of temporary border checks on the grounds of public order and public safety. Since the measure was first introduced on the borders with Germany and Lithuania between July 7th and August 2nd, Polish authorities checked over 493,000 people.
During that period, throughout the nearly 4 weeks temporarily reinstated of border inspections, we denied entry to Poland to 185 foreign nationals, and the basis for the refusal was the absence of documents required to cross the border.
Security considerations are also top of mind in Estonia, as the country is installing gates and barriers at the Narva Bridge, a key pedestrian border crossing with Russia.
The barriers help prevent vehicles from forcefully driving through the border checkpoint. About 5 years ago, we had a case where a vehicle from the Russian side drove through the existing barriers.
The security gate is also intended to help manage a potential migration surge on the bridge, allowing for complete closure of the checkpoint if needed. The entirety of the work is expected to be completed by the end of September. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabiszczan.
Poland is said to have more tanks by 2030 than the UK, Germany, France, and Italy combined. This comes after Warsaw signed another deal with South Korean defense company Hyundai Rotem to procure additional K2 tanks. On Friday, Polish Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz signed an agreement worth over $6 billion with Hyundai Rotem for 180 K2 battle tanks. This marks the country's second deal with the company, after the first was struck in 2022, also for 180 K2 tanks. This will take Poland's tank numbers to 1,100 vehicles by 2030, giving the country a bigger armored force than the total of UK, Germany, France, and Italy combined, who are expected to field some 950 tanks by the end of the decade. Social media platform X has once again become the site of a diplomatic clash, with Tom Rose, the U.S. ambassador nominee to Poland, admonishing the country's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, over his recent comment on the situation in Gaza. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk joined in on Sunday, emphasizing that Warsaw has been a major supporter of Israel's fight against Islamist terrorism, but distancing Poland from the ongoing operations of the current Israeli government.
Prime Minister Donald Tusk recalled the joint experiences of the Polish and Jewish nations under Nazi occupation to draw a line between supporting the State of Israel and the actions of its current leadership.
Poland was, is, and will be on the side of Israel in its fight against Islamist terrorism, but never on the side of politicians whose actions lead to hunger and the death of mothers and children. This should be obvious for nations that together endured the hell of World War II.
This comes after the U.S. ambassador nominee to Poland, Thomas Rose, took to the social media platform X to respond to Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, who said on Saturday that, quote, "the starving children of Gaza have no idea what Hamas is," and called on Israel to respect international law.
As you well know, history offers no precedent where a terrorist group wages war for the explicit annihilation of a sovereign state, embeds itself among civilians, and then relies on that very state to supply it with food, water, and fuel. And yet, that is exactly what Israel has done, often under duress, often at great cost and risk to its own soldiers, and almost always without reciprocity.
President Donald Trump nominated Mr. Rose to be the next ambassador to Poland back in February. He is currently awaiting confirmation by the U.S. Senate, required before he can begin his mission to Warsaw. The Polish leadership calling on Israel to obey international law should not come as a surprise. The Polish embassy in Jordan, as well as multiple Polish charities, have been facilitating deliveries of aid into the Gaza Strip. Warsaw recognized the State of Palestine in 1988, and since then it has firmly stood for the two-state solution, maintaining diplomatic relations with both Israel and Palestine. This could prove problematic for future ambassador Thomas Rose, who describes himself on social media as a not-so-secret agent of MAGA Judeo-Christian conspiracy, and often shares posts claiming that there is no famine in Gaza, especially not one caused by Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Like this video posted by the Israeli Foreign Ministry.
It's cystic fibrosis, a genetic illness. Israel already facilitated this boy's medical transfer to Italy back on June 12th.
But the images coming out of Gaza paint a very different picture, one of desperate Palestinians looking at their starving children and having nowhere to get food, as Israeli forces have been targeting both charity trucks and aid distribution centers. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And that concludes this edition of World News, but do stay tuned because World Talks with Sasha Farbach is coming up next.